let's get into your background a little bit. Give me your layout. Where you're at right now. What are you doing? Why'd you get into healthcare? And I guess the bigger question is, what's wrong with you that you haven't left? Like, why are you still in it?
You could turn around as fair play, right? We've both been doing this a long time, but
that's true.
Yeah, the short answer is, you got to go back to probably a lot of people that are listening that if I mention a couple of company names where I started my career, they're like, what the hell's he even talking about? I never heard of these companies, but they were really the progenitors of the large EMR companies that, we've all now come to know and despise. But I came up growing up through the ranks of what used to be called shared medical systems, which, at the time, in the early 90s and up through 2000s, had similar market share to maybe not what Epic has today, but it had, roughly a third of the market share with, at the time, McKesson HBOC and, other competitors that were out there. Probably Meditech was probably the next largest, or maybe Allscripts, but that market's just
so
changed.
Those first companies you just mentioned, probably 50% of the people listening don't even know what you just said. Shared medical, McKesson HBOC. What are you saying?
Yeah. So those, in my case, shared medical was acquired by Siemens in and around 2000, and it became part of that huge corporation. The idea was to combine the best of both healthcare IT, which was the shared medicals component, with diagnostic imaging. And if you think about it, very similar to what GE Health had done with IDX. There's another, we can go back and do this all day, of what the genealogy is of all these companies, but none of them really worked out from that perspective. And I was just fortunate to work in a side of the business that had the foresight, really, when HIPAA was coming to bear, that there was the need to do the electronic transactions around basic stuff we take for granted today, like doing a claim electronically and receiving the remittance and eligibility verification and those types of things. And the standards were just taken off when I got into the industry. And I started with a group at Shared Medical that was one of the first independent clearinghouses. So even though we supported almost all of there were 800 shared medical clients at the time, which kind of gives you an idea of the size of how big it was. We also did integrations with IDX and Meditech and Epic. At the time, Epic was emerging, but that kind of gave me the bug and the kind of perspective that as the industry was changing, it's kind of evolved from this mode. And you can probably remember back at the time where, organizations, vendors would give presentations, and it was always the hospital was actually the information system in the hospital were kind of at the center of the healthcare universe, and payers were out here someplace, and life sciences were out here, and docs were over here, and because they were all independent at the time. And none of them were talking to each other. So you think it's bad now. Go back when I started in the industry, it was just absolutely horrendous there, and everything was fax, phone calls. It was literally the dark ages at the time. So those
did you guys also own Unity? Did that come part of it? Or I got to tell you a funny story about Unity. So when I got into healthcare is when I started working. Well, I did a little bit of consulting before, trying to help a couple AI companies get into healthcare. And I didn't really know the healthcare space. I just knew that coding was the stupidest thing in the world, the way they were doing it. And I was working with these NLP companies. I'm like, this should really come together. And at the time, like 3M's like, this doesn't even make any sense. And I went, healthcare is a really weird industry. Like at least my little dipping my toe into it, they push back against anything new, like just constantly. And so that's how I ended up talking to Ralph Ray as one of the real pivotal people early days in class, the best in class guys.
Sure.
So I interviewed with them, and then they hired me, and they were going to train me for a week. And they're like, oh my gosh, we're doing this project for Siemens. We're calling Siemens customers to do sets. It was calling innovation and unity. And I didn't know what those meant.
Yeah.
And so they said, hey, here's kind of a script. normally we train you for a little while, but we're really desperate. We got this big, whatever your user meeting was, where you put on cowboy hat, they would put on cowboy hats wherever and be out to Malvern.
Yeah, class would do that. Yeah.
That's what I mean. When I joined class.
Yeah, it's innovation. That's how you knew who all the class guys were, because they had the cowboy hats.
Because we put we had cowboy hats on. So I joined, and again, 2 days after joining, I was supposed to not make any research calls for like a week. And class at the time was like 6-7 people full time. It was really small. And they're like, hey, we're under the 8 ball. Kent and Adam and Ralph, they're going out to the big Siemens user meeting, and they're going to have their cowboy hats on. I'm like, literally everything you say, I don't know what that means, nor do I care at this point. And they said, we need you to call. We don't have enough Unity feedback from Unity customers. And they said, so you're going to call CMOs on your list about Unity. And I didn't know at the time, like CMO, chief medical officers aren't going to know anything about Unity.
Exactly.
Like that's the opposite side. That's on the billing and the rev cycle side. Like what in the world, patient accounting side, like that has nothing to do with them. I didn't know. And I thought CMOs were chief marketing officers. I wasn't in healthcare. And so I'm calling in. I don't call him, the first doctor I called, I don't call him Dr. Smith. I call him Tony. Right? Hey, Tony. And so I don't already realize, I didn't know that in healthcare, even if they're not your doctor, because before I was naive enough to know if they're not my doctor, why in the heck would I call them doctor? You're not my doctor. Well, no, there's no sense of humor or being familiar outside. So I call this doctor. He's like, it's Dr. Smith. And I'm like, and I'm one of those people, I'm just kind of a jackass all the time. Like, oh, Dr. Smith. Okay. And then I said, Siemens having us do it, only take a couple minutes. Want to ask you about Unity. And there's a pause. It's like, you're calling me, taking my time away from my patients and my meetings with my medical staff to talk to me about Siemens Unity. Like, yeah. And he's like, you're an idiot. And he hangs up. And then I call another one, and I'm getting this really bad feedback. And I go to them. I'm like, hey, guys, can you tell me what Unity is and why they're all getting mad at me? And then Ralph's like, you should have never got those. Like Unity, doctors wouldn't know. And I'm like, holy crap, I got a lot to learn. So that was mine. And I think I was calling them while you were still at Siemens.
Probably. Yeah. It sounds about the same time. It's funny that you mentioned that, because that's when I was consulting at the time, and having grown up in California, but working here, consulting at SMS, that's where I met my wife, and she was a Unity programmer. She did all of actually an implementations director. She did all of the really fun implementations at the New York City public hospitals at H&H, doing those in the middle of the night. So,
I bet she's got some more stories.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's falls into the category of literally, that stuff just, it builds character and makes you stronger, but it gives you a unique understanding and perspective of how healthcare is delivered, both from a technology perspective and from a population perspective.
So outside of where you are now, what's been another stop along your way where you're like, it wasn't just that we had a good solution. That was an awesome place to work.
It was incredible. I mean,
so that would be shared in Siemens.
I would think the short answer is yes, only because kind of in the same way, like today's crop of people that are coming into healthcare on the technology side are familiar with Epic, and I think the general perception is everybody there is within this certain age demographic, and they're out of college, recently out of college. It's a fairly young demographic. That's exactly the way this was. I mean, it was everybody worked cool. 15, 16 hours a day, but then we literally had fun together the remaining time of the day and on weekends. And it's an incredibly tight-knit group of people. We're all still friends. So a lot of those folks went from Siemens, and then it was acquired by Cerner sometime later, and then acquired by Oracle. So people would probably be more familiar with that side of the equation. So
where do you think that things went wrong with Microsoft /Zixi /Centillion /Caradigm? Like, was it too was it too early? Or was this kind of a cultural misalignment between Microsoft, which is more of an infrastructure type
Yeah,
organization, and because that had such awesome. I
there's
remember working with you guys there, and I was like, this is really
well, that
going to
was gonna
change things.
yeah, that was the second part of the answer to your question was the other just phenomenal learning place I had was almost 10 years at Microsoft in the health and life sciences business there.
Yeah,
Um, so there's a couple things. I mean, fundamentally, it's not a Microsoft issue, or it's all of those things, but it was a significant challenge from when you think of the assets that Microsoft had at the time, and I just sit here um, and smile about it. But we had an embarrassment of assets of stuff as basic as I'm sitting here on a PC now in a Windows environment, but things like uh, the Xbox and things we were trying to basically leverage. If you remember the old the Kinect system, that was one of the first plugins to the Xbox that allowed you as the user, it basically scanned you and made you an avatar, and you could play in the game.
oh
Kind of
yeah,
same time Nintendo and PlayStation were coming, like the Wii came out roughly about that same time. And all that technology's completely changed. But we were looking at if you could use a Kinect to look at a human body, and we were actually working with long-term care facilities and even in home health. Hey, could it measure a patient's gait, or in a geriatric floor in a hospital, notice a change in a patient's gait and say, do predictive analytics and say, hey, this patient's right for a fall, you need to allocate resources to this particular patient. Or using a combination of things like, we're on Zoom now, but the Teams equivalent at the time, which I think was Skype for Business, integrated with Office and SQL, and you'd be able to create these care teams that would have access to data that would come out of a bedside monitor, whole series of bedside monitors, everything from blood pressure to temperature to heart rate, basic stuff. But it would send out alerts to care teams if the 2 out of 3 of those metrics, exceeded certain thresholds, and it was likely that the patient had some type of infection and needed to be treated, or possibly going into septic shock if it was in the ICU. So we were using all of those types of technologies, and the point I'm trying to make is nobody ever thinks of not just Microsoft, but really Oracle in that space and how technology gets used, or at that time IBM, SAP. I mean, all of these companies have tried to get into healthcare at various times with different assets, and they, to some degree, well, you can't argue all of those companies I just mentioned are providing all of the infrastructure of everything that's used, that's built on top of it. That's not even arguable. But to the point where to the role that they actually play in patient care themselves, I think that was the investment in Azixia and what became Imalgo was one of the first attempts at creating what you'd think of as a platform company like Microsoft, providing its own intellectual property for healthcare. And I think it was
so do you think it was you just had too much? And if you had fewer resources, you'd been able to focus more? Was it just like there was too much potential opportunity?
Hey, you're in Utah. I think it's the example of the pioneers. What happened to the pioneers, right? They all got arrows in their back. I mean, it just
That's true.
I can't. That's probably the best analogy I can give. If it were coming out today as a technology, might be a little bit different. But I'll share this with you. The problem still hasn't been solved, and the idea was to take all of the data from those disparate systems and put them in a single common repository that people could then report on, as opposed to having to go to literally hundreds of different systems and databases.
Well, anyway, how's your bracket?
Talk to me after Saturday into the second round, into the round of 32. I was in the top 95.5 percentile in the country. I don't think I've won a game since. I've got UConn's the only team I got left.
That's probably all you need if you have them winning.
I'm like way down at the bottom of my bracket. I got no chance of winning anything.
Yeah, once my favorite teams lose out early, I don't care. I want chaos. I just want NC State all the way, baby. I have no tie to them, but I don't care.
I got more enjoyment watching the LSU game the other night with now I'm totally drawing a blank of who they were playing. The women's game. Jeez, thank you. Yeah, Caitlin Clark.
Iowa.
Yeah, the LSU Iowa game. Yeah.
Yeah, I normally don't get into that, but she's such a good player.
Yeah.
Like the game's a little slow for me, just a lot slower. But every once in a while, there's someone that's so captivating. Like I remember with Sue Bird back at UConn. Just the skill level is undeniable. The speed is speed and strength's a lot less, but the skill level is undeniable.
Well, there's no question about it. But I think what's really neat, I mean, being the father of two daughters who were athletes, not at that level, but watching what's happened with the name, image, and likeness with the NIL stuff, like
she should stay in college forever. She's making way more money.
She has another year of eligibility. She probably should, but
she should. She'll make way more money.
Well, that's the thing. But she and Livy Dunn, who's a gymnast at LSU, they're, I think, of the top 10 NIL generators, women make. I think they're 4 out of the top 10, and Caitlin Clark's one of them. I think.
Yeah, I think she's $2 million a year, right?
It's crazy. Yeah, kid's still in college. So,
hey, I'm a libertarian. I throw away my vote every year, and I vote for some independent candidate in the POTUS every 4 years. So, you see that there's that one meme that's like, where someone says, if you're voting, like if I have friends that always, either side, they would attack me. Like, well, you're not voting for Trump. That means you're voting for Hillary. I said, no, I'm voting for the Johnson guy, the independent.
Yes.
And they're like, well, that's the same thing. I said, hang on a second. So if I don't want to vote for Senator, for not for Jar Jar, who's the big fat slug thing? Not Jar Jar.
Jabba the Hutt.
Yeah, but I don't want to vote for Jabba the Hutt.
Yeah.
So I vote for Yoda. Really, what you're saying is I'm voting for Senator Palpatine because that's a throw. It's like that weird transitive thing. I'm like, I'm having a lot of fun poking the bear and all my friends on the left and the right. I'm having a ton of fun right now.
Yeah.
Everybody reacts, and you can't argue. Like if someone feels a certain way, there's no. I don't even get. And even in healthcare, I don't. Like I this doctor there, they get really ticked off at me. He's like an OBGYN. And because something I put out about patient experience was on LinkedIn. And my whole thing was like, hey, the overall experience of the patient is really important. Like you need to take it more seriously because as a healthcare consumer, it's not a great experience. And he was super upset, like coming out about scented oils or hippie music or trapezes or something like, okay, what do you even, I don't even know what you're talking about. I didn't say doing a circus, like having a circus, but the way things are going with the younger generation, they're not going to put up with Gen Xers like you and me. Like they're just not going to. They can't fathom that they're treated like this, that you're not the patient. You're just kind of being swung around at the whims of the health system of the physician. You're just like, no. You have to do everything according to what we want you to do.
Yeah.
The next generation just isn't. They're going to say this experience is so incongruent with everything else that I experience as a person. I'm not going to do it. And I think that's why you see Amazon getting into what they're doing and others, and Walmart. They're like, there's an opportunity here, and the opportunity is created because of the bad experience. Anyway, I'm getting off. I'm driving in oncoming traffic a little bit there.
No, but it's relevant to things that you and I have talked about in the past, and it goes back to the opportunity that companies like Microsoft saw and continue to see in solving this problem, because it still hasn't been solved. And you think about trying to align to that consumer experience for the employed population. We've got our employer, we've got whoever the health plan is that we're dealing with, we've got our docs, and and they don't necessarily communicate all that well. And then you've got, life sciences companies that are trying to get access to that data to be able to, drive clinical trials, and everybody's got the right intent in mind. They're operating for the most part, I'm assuming positive intent for everybody. But they're all fighting for data, and we still haven't figured out in 2024 how to be able to not only safeguard that data, but to be able to share it effectively. And that's what we're doing at Verisma. Is one of the things where I am now, where I've been for about the last year and a half, is this whole notion of how data gets shared, not only in terms of how patients access their records, but there's all sorts of third parties that need to have access to patient information, like, attorneys in court cases and being able to address subpoenas, and health plans who need to do audits, and as managed care in the form of Medicare Advantage continues to grow. You got the government looking at this and saying, hey, are we really doing the right thing in terms of paying for this care? Did we pay the right amount? Did we pay too much? Did we not pay enough? It's a complex web, and all of that information is getting shared outside of the institution. And what concerns me is, while there are, contradicting what I just said, that there are players that, are operating with positive intent, there's always bad actors out there. And, you've seen it in the last year and a half to 2 years, maybe not even 2 years, but a third of the population has had their data compromised through a ransom hack, or, some kind of misappropriation of data.
Are you leading us into change right now?
It wasn't the intent, because
how do you
it's
avoid
still top of mind.
I haven't had a conversation that didn't touch on change at least once in the last week.
It was, I didn't go to Vive this year, but I was at HIMSS, and it was the constant talk of HIMSS, and we had a number of my colleagues, Max Chan on
I know Verisma. Max. He gave me he gave me the Young Ones book.
That's right.
People that aren't old enough are from England. One of the greatest sitcoms of all time, The Young Ones.
That's right. But yeah, Max went to Vive, and he said, that was right when the stuff hit the fan. He said that was the constant talk, and he and I are. It's a little too close to home, because Max worked there for, I think, 18 years. I was there for a little over 4.
Max was here 18 years?
Yeah.
Holy, that's like Shawshank Redemption institutionalized. He's like Red carving his name up. Red was here.
Yeah, it said Red was here. Max.
He's all here. Like, I miss my friend. I hope the ocean is as blue as it is in my dreams. Yeah, I've watched that every time it comes on. I have to turn it away, because if I even watch 1 minute, I'll watch the whole thing.
Yeah, it's that A Few Good Men.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, brother, where art thou?
Another classic.
Come on, that one we used to quote all the time. Me and my brothers, and I showed it to my kids. Like my wife, and she's like, "Don't show it to them." And then it's become like a family favorite. Just the whole thing, the lines in that, like, I'm the only. It looks like I'm the only one that remains unaffiliated. Where the one gets baptized, and then Tommy sold his soul to the devil.
But it's anything I've over the years, and the more I've read and get more into kind of quality movies and productions like that, I've come to recognize like what a gift, what a talent it is to be able to write. And I think all those movies have great actors in them, but it's the constant theme is
it's the writing, right? So I watched this it was like, I don't think it was a Joe Rogan podcast, but it's some podcast, and they were talking, somehow they got into like, why are a lot of movies so crappy today? It was like this guy, Critical Drinker and Nerdrotic, they criticize like a lot of the movies today and point out, and they do it in a pretty acerbic fashion, which I don't mind, people that really get crazy with stuff. But I think a lot of people think it's off-putting. But one of the discussions was, one guy was like, all these movies are just trying to chase diversity. And the other guy interrupts him and says, who cares? Like, who cares if someone, they have a white dude be a black dude and this, like, it doesn't matter. It goes, the problem is the writing. It isn't, you can have as diverse a collection of people as possible. That's great. Who cares? But why is the writing so bad? Like, the stories aren't interesting and the writing is so shallow. There's like no depth to characters anymore.
Yeah.
And there are certainly some shows I think that are really great. I watch like The Expanse. It's fantastic. I don't know if you've seen Shogun on Hulu right now.
Just started watching it. Yeah.
I mean, there's some stuff where it's fantastically well written. Like, to your point, characters. But then they got into Star Wars. They said, yeah, look at it. Hayden Christensen's not necessarily a bad actor, but when George Lucas is writing the dialogue, he sounds like an idiot. Same thing with Natalie Portman. She's won an Oscar for crying out loud.
Yeah.
But if you watched her in the Star Wars, you're like, she can't act. Yeah. So to your point, the writing is crucial.
Yeah, just it's one of the things I love being in Philadelphia is the access to, certainly American history. And pre and post Revolutionary War up to the current day. But I had an opportunity the other night to go hear a lecture by the head of he's the CEO of the National Constitution Center, which is in Philadelphia. And to some people it would sound like the most boring thing on the planet, but he was talking about the writings of like Seneca and Socrates and Plato and Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics, and the influence that those individuals had on the founding fathers. And it kind of put it in perspective. Like, everybody looks at the founding fathers and says, oh, it's, here's a bunch of, old white guys who were out of touch with reality. Well, they were in their 20s. They started writing the Federalist Papers and the Declaration, crazy. And they were all self-taught. And I think that's the point. It's just bringing me back to it. It's like they were so well read, and that's the reason why we've got the system of government that we do, for all its goods, bads, indifferences and foibles. But it is still remarkable, and it comes down to those writings. So that's my takeaway. I got to continue to read more.
Yeah, your input. We do that when it comes to research. So we have some people. So many of our customers, and you guys have always been really great to work with on this, but they'll come with their pre-baked notions, and they get kind of married to certain questions. And we try to back off and say, well, what's your objective? We need to start with the right side of the equation. What are you trying to accomplish? They go, oh, we want to run a survey. No, that's not the right side. That's the left side you're talking now. What's the objective again? Well, we want to understand, here's a problem in our business, what we're trying to understand. Okay, then, well, these three questions, that doesn't even apply, right? So let's kind of focus over there. So if you want a great output, we need to obsess on the input. So now let's focus on the input side. And that's like the founding fathers and others. They're reading some of the greatest writing, because back before, when you didn't have TV and you didn't have access to theater, etc., all you could do is think. You were on your own a lot. And
read and think. Yep.
And you couldn't experiment with too much, because it meant you were going to die or starve or something. So if you're going to say something, you better get it right, because your margin of error back in the day, hundreds and thousands of years ago, is a little bit higher than today, where I can make so many mistakes, and I come out bike, I can collapse lungs, concussion, etc. I can get life lighted somewhere.
Yeah.
But if there was no access to medical care, I'd probably ride, little granny like, or grandpa like, you know what I mean? So just did you see that interview? This is kind of related, with the CEO of NVIDIA. It was a couple weeks ago.
Mm-mm.
He was talking to students at Stanford. And what he was hoping is, I hope you guys have more suffering. Basically saying you need a lot more suffering, because what I look for isn't just raw intelligence. I look for people that have come out of really, truly difficult circumstances, not just someone was mean to me or someone challenged my ideas. Not that, like fundamental, you didn't have enough money. Your family was going without essential stuff. You had to grind, work your way up, blue collar, fast food. I'm looking for those people that I goes. So I hope, and this is how he ended to the Stanford student body. He's like, I pray that you will all suffer a lot more than you're suffering right now. That's
That
what he
went
said.
over well.
That's a gift. I mean, you can argue with it, but look what they did with NVIDIA. I mean, what are they, 1.8 trillion in market cap now? And they're taking it, and for so long, they were always like a third player in the silicon space, right? In the chip space.
Yeah.
But they could see he could see where it was arcing. And you have to have battle scars. If you don't have battle scars, you don't, I have it with some of my employees, young and insanely bright. But they have to listen to the old man on the porch, get off my lawn, or I'm Abraham Simpson yelling at the cloud. Old man yells at the cloud. Because I tell them, say, I've been where you are, like where you are in your life. I've been there, young, enormous amounts of energy. I look around and I see inefficiencies or something we're doing, and it just shouldn't be that way. And I'll rail, and they get upset. But you've never been where I am with all the battle scars now. See failing companies, seeing people getting fired, see massive recessions hit, seeing goes. So this is kind of the reason, but you need both, right? You need the old grizzled guys like us.
No question about it.
You need the young people that don't know anything, but they've got a lot of ideas and energy. You're trying to impart the wisdom to say, you need to think a little bit. You can't ready, fire, aim every time. Sometimes you have to ready, aim, fire,
Well, it's like how could, there's plenty of things that you could criticize Steve Jobs on, but one of them, one of the criticisms wouldn't be, how he completely reformed Apple. And the only reason why, not the only reason, but one of the primary reasons he was able to do that was because he got fired from it, 10 years before, and he had to go on and recover from that and build next, and, kind of created the operating system there. And, it allowed him to evolve. But, when's the last time you ever learned anything from, you learn from success, but I think it's probably fair to say, and you'd agree, you learn a hell of a lot more from failures than you do to success, because it doesn't feel good. You don't want to do that again.
Yeah, no, like when I hit a jump, right? Like first time hitting, because you have all different kinds of jumps. Like there's long and short, but the length of it's less important than your approach and the angle of the jump and the lip. Does it go up like this? Is it more straight? Is the landing much further down? Or are you actually going up and landing up higher? And every time you do the first one, the problem is you don't make it.
Right.
And it's missing it and doing it wrong that teaches you don't do that. You don't, until you do it, you don't know exactly what to do. And the times when I've actually cleared a jump, my first time, it's a whole new setup. I have to go back and do it 2-3 times because I know that was a fluke. That doesn't take. I don't have the muscle memory now. Anything like I didn't get scared into it. But it's interesting what you said about Steve Jobs, and I've noticed myself doing it. Like I'll bring up Elon Musk, and I almost feel like I have to say, now I don't agree with everything what Elon says on Twitter because obviously he gets off the handle. And I'm not talking about that. Like I'm literally talking about like his Neuralink. But you see people, I'll do so many calls and you'll see him kind of going like, and I almost have to say, can we put personality aside? Like if you bring up Hillary Clinton, I'm not going to go and have some sort of meltdown. I'm like, what is it about? I need to understand what you're saying first.
Yeah.
I may not like her, but she had some real policies that made sense. Now she's had a lot I didn't like, but same thing. I'm not talking about Musk's weird use of Adderall or whatever, or him. He has some crazy weird ideas about stuff. I don't care. I'm talking about Neuralink and what it can do. Like, can we freaking separate for half a second the idea that I'm talking about from the person who's the founder of it? Because if we can't do that, I don't know how. And I've actually had calls where I've kind of ended it and said, if we can't separate your distaste for the company I'm talking about, like there's a lot of people, they don't like Epic.
Right.
And if I give Epic any kudos, they get really upset. I'm like, can we stop for a second? Like, I'm not some super fan of Epic because I'm worried from an antitrust perspective. I'm worried about their anti-competitive influence on healthcare tech over the long term. But there's some things that Epic does that every company should emulate, but they're so upset or hurt or offended or whatever by Epic that I can't have a conversation about something Epic does without separating it. So it's like you almost had to do that disclaimer about Steve Jobs. And you know, like Steve Jobs, like, who cares? Like the guy was freaking genius. Like he was weird and quirky, and he was mean to some people sometimes, but we have to separate it, you know. All of us. Like, I wish we had more grace and forgiveness in society now. It's like we're judged. We're not allowed to go past some mistake that somebody finds about, even if it's 20 years ago. Dude, you said this to this guy and it was really insensitive. Said, well, can you assume that he and I worked it out?
Yeah.
And why do you need apology? It's 20 years later.
Exactly.
It didn't happen to you.
You're offended.
And do you think I might have progressed past that point, or this person might have progressed past that point? Can we get to that? So it's kind of funny. I don't mean to get off on a rant for a couple minutes, but it's just it adds so much friction in conversations when you have to constantly add these disclaimers. It should just be a given. Like, doesn't mean that because I like something this person did that I now decide everything the person did is now wonderful. No, I'm talking about this thing, just this on its own.
Yeah, it's like not that I ever debated when I was in school. It intimidated the heck out of me. But that's a lost art, right? And I love people that can, like my brother-in-law is really good at this. He'll just say, okay, now I'm going to take the other side of this, and we'll have a couple glasses of wine or pops or whatever, and he's helped me with that a lot. It's pretty amazing to see. It's like, okay, now I'm just going to take the other side of the argument. Let's go, and you're going to take the other side.
You're right. It's a lost art. In fact, my wife, one of the reasons she helped found a charter school, because of there's some other reasons, but one of the reasons she did, she wanted just things more balanced. They're heavy education focused, and one of the things they did is they started. My wife didn't start this, but she supported it. Was a Socratic method class. Mm-hmm. So every student in this called Mazer Prep, and it ended up being like one of the most successful, putting kids in Ivy League, and it's all over the place. Was that whole thing? Everyone had to do debate. There was no option. So it's kind of like the way they do in the English school systems. You look at some of the best debaters out there; they're from England and the UK, because they have learned to have these interactions and see the other side. Like there's that saying, right, that Stephen R. Covey came up with. It says, "Seek first to understand." Before you're understood. But right now it's like, no, I got to get my W over this person. No, I got to get my sound bite. I need to be understood. Like, well, then you're never going to get together. Why is that person saying what they're doing first?
Yep.
You know?
No, totally agree. I was just watching, I don't know if you ever read, I can never pronounce his first name. I think it's pronounced Amar, but Amar Toll's book, A Gentleman in Moscow.
I haven't read it.
So cut to the chase, but they just published it, the first episode now on, I think it's on Showtime or on like Showtime Paramount or whatever. But it's a story of just after the Russian Revolution, and they've shot the Tsar, Nicholas and Katerina are dead, and they're trying to pick off all of the Bolsheviks are picking off all of the wealthy folks, basically anybody that's got a title. And for reasons which I've kind of forgotten, his life is spared, but he's sentenced for the rest of his life in a at the time was a 5-star hotel in Moscow. He can never leave the hotel.
Oh yeah.
Ian McGregor's in it. And the reason why it goes back to the writing, it's the British aspect of it, but it's the writing that goes back to Toll, but whoever wrote the screenplay for this thing, it's astounding. And you could think of it like it's the most slow, boring subject in the world, but it's so well written. It's absolutely riveting.
I'm gonna have to check it out. That's really cool. Well, let's jump back to, you were kind of getting there. So I was going to ask this question as you're talking about your company, what you're doing at Verisma and information flow, et cetera. I was like, kind of with HIPAA right now, is it more helpful or harmful, do you think?
Well, it certainly hasn't hurt our business. It's been a help from a business perspective. You have to look at it through a couple different lenses, right? From the patient's perspective, it's probably been helpful because there are more safeguards on that data. And, when HIPAA came about, it was like, okay, well, isn't this an overblown concern? Because what do I care if people know I've got a, A1C of 6.2 or, whatever it is. That's not the issue. The issue is, once you get into the system, you get access to anything, right? You start getting access to Social Security numbers and credit cards. And
PHI is the most valuable on the black market. That's for sure.
It is right now, for sure. So from that perspective, the things that we do as a business and the technology that we utilize drastically cuts down on what's referred to as unauthorized disclosure. So making sure that data is not going to an unintended party. Our rate for those non-disclosures is absurdly low. It's like less than 90 per million requests that we get.
Wow.
That's far, far below the industry standard. But the other side of it is, and from a patient perspective, to look at it, you go to request your record from a doc. I remember having this conversation and like, hey, these are my records. And this was kind of at the advent of HIPAA, but the doc's office manager said, they're not your records, they're my records. They're the office records and you can't have them. I'm like, wait a minute, what? Well, okay, you can have them, but you got to pay. It's going to be, $50 a page to get them. Like, no, this is crazy.
What?
That's since evolved, but the challenge of sharing that data to where it rightly needs to go. And if, God forbid, you've got an issue with, a loved one. I just went through this with my brother. I'm executive of his estate, and trying to get access to, still what amounts to HIPAA in his death certificate and all of the things that I had to show to, prove I was, I am who I am, and have the right to get access to this stuff. It's great to have those protections in place, but it's a struggle for the average person to try to figure it out. And probably the even better example I could give is go on your local hospitals or health systems webpage and just type in something simple like medical records request, or how do I get access to my medical records? You'll see there's no standard approach to it in the industry. We think we've got a great solution for it for patients and third parties, private labeling it on our clients' websites. But more often than not, I'll go out there and it's like, okay, here's an Adobe Acrobat form, print this out, then fill it out, then, fax it back or scan it to us and email it. It's come on, it's 2024. This is insane. And what
kind of pushback do you get? I mean, because you guys do have some really great stuff that can help with that. What's like the common obstacle that you run into?
In terms of
like,
having an electronic solution for that?
Yeah, like, why are organizations, when they're not adopting it, what is it? Just they're stuck in some massive Epic upgrade, or what's happening?
That's a great example, but it's more of we got bigger fish to fry. It's not in the specific space in health information and particularly in release of information. There's lack of a strategic lens by so many people in the industry of if it's done right, the value it could bring to the system. So maybe if I say that another way, so many institutions are like, how many organizations do you see that are investing in patient/consumer engagement today?
How many are saying it or actually doing it?
Well, at least talking it.
All of them.
Yeah, they're all talking it. Whether they do it or not is another issue. But that's
whether they do it or not, and then how they do it. They'll go grab Press Ganey or do something like that. Oh, hey, we're getting feedback and we got our MyChart portal. That's all you need. We're like, whoa, you're missing a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, well, this goes back, where you started the conversation around the comparison of the healthcare experience to, for the millennials or what are we, Gen Zers now? How what their experience is as a consumer, and healthcare is woefully behind in that. So, like anything else, I think organizations by and large they're focused on the right thing of trying to streamline and simplify patient engagement. But, and they're starting with things that seem intuitive, like, hey, let's do an online scheduling system. Let's have, appointments, not just the ability to book an appointment, but to see the whole schedule online and say, oh, well, Tuesday at 11's good, but I'm booked, but I can do Thursday at 2, that kind of thing. That's a great place to start, but there's so many more areas of low-hanging fruit. So you just think of, like, to me, it's just untouched in this whole area of requests for information. To my point, where, why couldn't I have a log, be able to log into the web page, prove I am who I am. I'm authorized to request my records or on behalf of a family member, and then have those records sent to me however I want to have them transmitted. That's coming few and far between. It's still probably less than a third, maybe 40% of the industry operates that way. The other 60% still dealing with paper. And that's just such a simple thing to be able to improve patient / consumer / community, because there's so many people that do have a need to get access to that data. Simplify it for them. Make this an easy process. But it goes back to your question about, what's HIPAA meant. In that respect, people hide behind HIPAA as a reason to not do things. Oh, I don't know about that. That's, I'm opening up information. So HIPAA's kind of become this safeguard for business. It's absolutely necessary, but then it becomes a tool to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm concerned about, how this is going to be viewed, or how it might be misconstrued. And it's just become an easy roadblock for people to not do things.
Yeah. Well, you brought up something in a prior discussion, like about TEFCA. And you're like, hey, we should discuss TEFCA in light of the sale of, de-identified patient data. What? Yeah, go a little bit further on that.
Yeah, so it scares me, right? So in the sense that I see organizations that are making patient data, and I want to be clear how I say this because it could be easily misconstrued.
This is the OverReaction podcast, man. So swing.
It is an overreaction, but there is a real concern that organizations that make this data available can easily miss, even though they're acting in good faith to de-identify patient data, it becomes easier and easier to mishandle that information and send it to an unintended party, or oops, that should have been de-identified data and it wasn't de-identified. And the classic example, I won't mention names, but there was a major health system down in the Southeast that had a request from the state attorney general that was looking for specific patient information and for a population of patients. And I think the impact was maybe certainly a couple hundred patients, but what they were requesting was this much, and they inadvertently sent out the entire patient record of well over 100 patients to the state for information that they just weren't entitled to. So there's that stuff that goes on, but what really scares me is the challenge of making data available to life sciences companies and other players. But I don't think patients fully understand that there are health systems that are out there that are saying, okay, great, we're going to de-identify this data, but we're going to take all the data for the patients that are, in whatever cohort, whatever chronic disease state, and we're going to sell this to, pick your life sciences.
We're going to take the oncology, the cardiovascular data. We're going to send that to Medtronic. We're going to send this to Google, sell that to them. And then Pfizer wants this, and Moderna or whatever. Yeah, I put out a post about that. Pissed off, sorry, I got to clean up my language. Ticked off. a lot of people is I went, as a patient, it already sucks that you're already paying, right? You got big copay or cash pay.
Yep.
And then your information's being used. And so I put out this thing like, if you're going to use patient data, cut the cost for that medical care. You can't double dip on it. I'm sorry. It just feels so wrong to me that you're double dipping on these patients. You got all this medical debt. Like I've thought about, I'm going to start a health insurance company. And if anyone takes this idea, I'm suing you. About a health insurance company says, if you agree that all your data can be used, that we'll use it, your premiums are 100% free. And and copays up to a certain amount is going to be covered.
Okay.
So you'd have people signing up like, I already think that I'm going to do it. Yeah, okay, fine. Sell all my stuff, but my health insurance premiums, they're 100% covered if you're going to do this to me.
Yeah, it's like, well, the lack of transparency to me is astounding, and people will hide behind the fact of
but the government said that the Transparency Act, but yeah,
exactly. So yeah, I'm 100% in agreement with you, and I think organizations need to be more upfront with their consumers, because I don't think if more consumers understood that, I think there would be just a visceral reaction to, you're not taking my patient data, and I don't care if it's de-identified or not. And that was kind of my point.
And you're paying, and you're paying. As a patient, I want my data. You make it brutally hard for me to get. It's about me.
Yep.
Like I had to get prodded, poked, injured, blood, everything else I went through, and you're making it hard for me. And if you do give it to me, you give it to me in degrees. Like when I had all my accidents, and I was up at the medical center here, to try to get the CT and the X-ray and the MRI, guys, I lost 3 months of riding. I broke everything, lung collapse, everything. I've earned the right to see my they make it so hard for me to get.
Yeah.
And then they're going to sell it on the back end and make money off it. And I get, hey, you're a low margin business, but you're doing it on my pain and my suffering. And you made it so hard for me, like the wait times and the follow-ups. I felt like I wasn't the consumer at all. I was just this cog in this wheel. And then they're coming out saying, oh, you want to start messaging back and forth. We're going to start charging the patient for messaging.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't, like I tell everyone, if you want socialized medicine like I had in Canada, which isn't great, like it's just for your run of the mill, it's fine. Anything more than that, we would come across the border of the United States. One of the reasons I moved here. So if we keep doing what we're doing, that's where we're going to end up, and you're not going to be happy.
Yep.
I don't think.
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting to see if, as TEFCA comes closer to reality, I think it runs the risk of, being another HIPAA, that it's great in its intent, like almost any government sponsored initiative, but is it going to put up more roadblocks and actually make it harder for patients and companies to do business?
Like we talked about before, like the unintended consequences of government intervention legislation. Like it means something, but it's like, okay, you can't look right at it. You need to look at the periphery. What is actually going to happen? So like High Tech Act.
Mm-hmm.
So I've talked to lots of health systems, the ones that will do it off the record and say, you can't ever say that. I told you this, that, okay, before you installed big unnamed EHR system, and it's kind of all of them. There's no one who's no one's a white knight in any of this.
Right.
What's your financial position now? You've been live with this thing for years as before. Is it better or worse? Almost unanimous that we're worse. Okay. Physician nurse satisfaction, better or worse? Almost universally worse.
Yep.
And then it's, patient outcomes and quality must be through the roof. Nope. Almost no appreciable movement. I said, well, then what are you getting? Well, we have access to the data now.
Like, oh, really?
They're like, okay, that was a lot of money, So I always wonder, like, if high tech didn't come out, because it wasn't like you weren't selling, right? Unity and the products that you had, right? It wasn't like IDX CareCast wasn't being adopted, or care innovation, like these things were happening. I always, you can't go back in time. But if I go back and say, what if high tech didn't come out? What if there was just an incentive, but it wasn't strict implementation and it had to be done this certain way, right? It was just, we want adoption of electronic health records. All we're going to offer is an incentive. We're not going to put guns to back people's head. We're not going to have penalties. We're not going to. Right. I have to imagine we would have been much further ahead than we are now.
Well, it is analogous. There are a couple stories in the news this week. If you take it outside of healthcare, one is the mandate of getting off carbon combustion by 2030. Like hey, there's only going to be EVs available. Well, got a few infrastructure problems to resolve between now and then. But the one that just, you talk about that and unintended consequences. Did you see the solar panel farm in Texas?
Yeah, it was like 4,000 acres, all just destroyed
by a hail.
The hail destroyed every single one of them.
Completely destroyed.
So I was talking to this guy.
Didn't see that coming.
Yeah, you have to have diversification, right? Like electric vehicles, fantastic. Where I live, way out in the country, I couldn't do it. Like hybrids, a hybrid's fantastic. I wish there were way more hybrids. Same thing with your power grid. If you go through a long spell where, and I didn't even know this, like from a solar perspective, if there's areas in the world, even though it gets a lot of sun, but has an incredibly high humidity rate, it dramatically lowers the effectiveness of the solar panels. I didn't know that. Sun, whatever. So you're like, you need to be diversified. And I don't understand the reticence to nuclear. Like that seems to be such a no-brainer.
Particularly,
I just don't, like, I feel like sometimes I'm taking crazy because like maybe I'm the idiot. Like, because I just don't listen to the news anymore. I just can't. I always ask people now, can you show me the source material? And they'll send me like an article from Fox or CNN. I'm like, no. The source material. I want to see the original source. And then when you start reading into it, you go, what are we what are we doing?
Yeah, that's crazy. But that's the thing. We have to do that in healthcare as well. It's like, okay,
for sure.
What are the, this sounds great, but what could potentially be the unintended consequences of what's happening? And that's kind of what we're
like seeing. Like the AI legislation. What's it called? I wrote it down. Oh yeah, it's Executive Order on Development and Use of AI. The safe, secure, trustworthy development of AI. And the government is going to they're going to have the chief AI officers or whatever.
Right.
I'm like, oh crap, we're going to kill innovation. We're going to strangle the AI baby before it even gets out. Because we automatically jump to, it's coming out new. Nope, it's going to be Terminator. Skynet's going to turn on. It's going to turn on us and wipe us all out.
Yeah.
Like, okay. Like, can we just not? Can we please just not? Right?
No, I mean, it's that level of. It's great to have the oversight, but probably not the regulation. I didn't probably say that quite right, but people need to be looking at how it's being used, but to govern it and put specific legislation in place, I think is a little premature at this point while we're still figuring it out.
Well, exactly. We're on the 10-yard line. Like, kick the ball in the end zone, and the idiot receiver ran it out to the 10 and got tackled. We're at the 10-yard line. We got 90 yards to go. We're like, we don't even know how the game's going to play out. How do we actually know what to put in place to stop? I just don't know. So if they stuck to some really, really super basic things where it wasn't a heavy burden, I'd go, okay. Like if there were like 2 or 3 things, we just want to make sure that whatever gets developed isn't going to do, like Isaac Asimov's 3 laws or something for AI or robotics, like something like that. Great. But it never, like you said, it never stops there. Pretty soon it grows and grows and grows. And then you're like, your AI can't do anything. It'll all be Microsoft Clippy popping up. That's the extent of our innovation. Like, I'm going to kill this little thing.
That predates me.
You remember Clippy? It would pop up on it would pop up. You open Microsoft Word, like, what are you doing? It's like Alvin and the Chipmunks. Get off my screen. I'm just trying to type a letter, Yeah. Well, what else, man? Anything else we need to? I think we've lapped the field, offended every person.
Got to be a couple more people that we can, the sensibilities we can.
Yeah,
offend.
who haven't we offended yet? I think we kept it. I think we kept it pretty PG. I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's
Any. So
always
I
great
guess
to.
my last question is, and I get these from the trigonometry guys, but I used to ask this when I used to teach people how to do interviewing. So I was an executive recruiter back in the day. We didn't even get into mountain biking either. Anyway,
It'd be a short conversation from my.
Yeah, no, I was gonna pull up some Simpsons clips, and I'm like, nah, let's not do that. Yellow man bad, orange man bad, or whatever. But is there a question that we didn't cover, or a point we didn't cover that we should be covering? Even as it relates to Verisma in your business. Is there maybe I change it this way? Is there something that health systems and organizations should be considering that you think right now they're just not? They just have the biggest blind spot for. Maybe we'll end with that.
Well, it's not a blind spot because everybody is aware of it. At least that's my definition of a blind spot. Like, well, I guess your blind spot's there in a car, but I think in general, it really reflects on what we were talking about in terms of patient engagement. That it's just we've made it too difficult, and we need to be looking at really low hanging fruit around. Like I'll give you a great example. It was complicated, but there was. I think you have to do this now for Clear as an example. But
the check-in at the airport.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
But this happened to be reasons way too complicated. I ended up getting a return from the IRS, which I still haven't gotten yet. And in order to get that, I had to sign on and use ID.me. Have you ever seen that? You ever seen ID.me? So that was a new process for me. And it wasn't the simplest thing in the world. I think we could make that easier. But now anytime I go to get my passport to, anything that's government related, I've got my it's like single sign-on for everything related to anything federal. Well, we need to adopt something like that, because how many different systems do I have to sign on to get access to my information, to register for an appointment? Maybe it's the unique identifier for a
what's
patient.
The pushback against that? I'm a libertarian guy by nature, but I still don't, from a healthcare perspective, I just don't understand what the pushback is against that. It would eliminate so much friction and replication.
There's a huge faction within healthcare, and you just kind of made me think about it. It's the non-invented here syndrome.
Oh,
so the historically, going back 25 years or more, like I would IT vendors are probably the worst at this, right? So they'll look and say, hey, well, now there's a requirement for trying to think of a really good example, but think in terms of revenue cycle is probably the best thing I could think of, is where if you're a health system or a doc, you've got to have all these separate relationships with payers, every payer that you do business with, to send and receive those transactions and get paid on it. Well, it took a while to recognize that there needed to be, if not a handful of clearinghouses that could manage all those payer connections, so you could do a one-to-many connection instead of a one-to-one. The opportunity for that is, or the challenge with that was, when it first came out, all of the IT companies said, we'll just be our own clearinghouse. Well, you weren't solving any problems by doing that. You were still creating all these one-to-one connections. And healthcare has always been guilty of that. So they're always, if there's a significant fault in the IT world in healthcare, it's either the large health systems themselves that have the wherewithal and the finances to do it, try to do these things themselves through their innovation centers, or they're relying on their healthcare vendors, when there are plenty of industry neutral players, like ID.me as an example, that can easily verify, set up a single patient identity. They're just reluctant to adopt it.
Yeah, I think you're right. It kind of reminds me of, not to get too off track, but it kind of reminds me of some discussions I've had with people that are, we need to raise the tax rate up. The rich aren't, and I'm not rich. The rich aren't paying enough, regardless of if I think they're paying 54% of all taxes or 70% or something. It's crazy, but they're saying not paying enough. And I say, okay, let's say I agree with your premise. So you're for like a flat tax with no deductions, right? You're for 100% reformation of the IRS and the tax code. Like, what do you mean? I said, you can raise the tax rate to 90%. If you don't limit all the loopholes, they're not paying it. The middle class and the upper middle class, they're the ones that really get taken over the barrel for this. So it's the same. I think it's the reason we'll never have like a flat tax. They just said, hey, it's 17% for everyone. If people are actually legitimately poor, they don't pay anything. But for everybody else, it doesn't matter. If you're making billions of dollars a year, you're paying for it. You can't get it. There's no loophole. Like you would, but the problem is you wouldn't, because how many you'd have to lay off in the government? How many accounting firms, tax law firms, everything else, billions and billions and billions of dollars are made from that friction. There's massive amounts of money to made from friction. So I always think about that when we're talking about what you were just mentioning on there's two stands to gain a lot of money from having this friction stay in place.
Yep. No doubt. And that's, the friction that exists between health plans and providers is, another classic example of that very situation.
It is. Well, man, it's been fun. We'll have to do it again sometime. Follow up later in the year.
Yeah.
And then we'll sign off. You got anyone wants to know about Steve Aylward? Go find him on LinkedIn. He's on X. You're on Twitter, right?
I am. Yeah, it's SGA tweet.
Okay. Go on Verisma.com.
It should be SGAX now, I guess.
So Jax. That's right. I'll say on the JBix, BIX or whatever instead of KS. Anyway, it's been fun, man.
I didn't think about changing that. I got to do that.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah.
You should, man. Well, we'll see you around, my friend.
All right. Thanks, Jeremy.
See you.